We are going to be in Matthew chapter 8, so if you have your Bibles, break those open. Matthew chapter 8, verse 18 through 22. It's kind of a strange interlude in between sets of miracles that we see in Matthew. Matthew gave us the three miracles at the beginning of 8, where you have the healing of the leper, the healing of the centurion's servant, and the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And then after that, you have the casting out of the demons. And now here we come up on just a really strange set of verses that a guy comes up to Jesus and said, "I'll follow you," and Jesus says something just off the wall, what seems off the wall to him. And if you read it out of context, it's hard to get it to fit in. And like, what is this? Why is this here? And so I want to kind of get you in the context of why Jesus is doing this. If you remember, he's got crowds of people following him everywhere he goes. And when he came to Peter's mother-in-law's house, that crowd followed him there. And he spent all night dealing with the crowd, healing them, casting out demons. And just like you, how many of y'all pull all-nighters? How do you feel the next day? You're good, and then you go to bed, and you wake up the day after that, and how do you feel? Like there's a wall that you just like ran slam into. That's kind of how Jesus is feeling here. He's fully God, but he's also fully man. Which means just like you, he gets hungry. Just like you, he gets tired. And at this point, he's been up through the night dealing with crowds of people, and he is exhausted. And how do I know that? If you look on down below this interlude, at 23, the next miracle is the calming of the sea. And what's he doing in the boat as they're crossing over? He's asleep. He is. Any of y'all slept through something everybody else woke up? Some of y'all are heavy sleepers. God bless you. I wish I was. But sometimes you get so tired that you just can sleep through anything. And I think Christ is exhausted here. And so this begins with him saying, let's get in a boat and take off. I need to get some separation. And you see him do that frequently. There's oftentimes he'll go up on the mountain and pray, or he'll get away in the garden and pray. And he's just trying to get some time where he can have some time with the Lord, and he can have some time of rest. He kind of crashes like all of us do. It's hard to think of Jesus in that manner, but that's the fully man. He knows where you've been. He's walked in your shoes. He knows exhaustion. He knows exhilaration, and that's I think where he is here. And all these people are following him for a reason. And I want to ask you a starting off question to get you kind of thinking right. And that is, what are the essential characteristics of Christian life? If you were to ask yourself, if I had a lineup of people down here and one of them a Christian and nobody else was, how would you pick the Christian out of the lineup? How do you identify the traits of Christianity? And believe it or not, you can do that. There's people that you can look at and say, now there's a Christian. There's other people you may not know, but you have to get to know them. As you get to know them, you see Christ in them. So as you think through that, what's the characteristics of Christian life? Any of y'all know who Ernie Banks is? Probably none of y'all do. He's a Major League Baseball player. From 1953 to 1971, he played for the Cubs. His nickname was Mr. Sunshine. I don't know how manly that is, but it does tell you a little bit about his disposition. He was also known as Mr. Cub. He played shortstop and first base for him. For 18 years, he's in the majors, which is a long career. And one of the things he said about his management was that if they knew how much he loved baseball and knew that he would play baseball for no pay, they would have not paid him anymore. He loved baseball so much that he would have played it for nothing. And Major League Baseball isn't just showing up at a game and playing. There's workouts. There's a whole diet plan you have to be on. I mean, playing baseball is not easy. And he loved it so much, he committed himself wholeheartedly to it and would have done it for free. And using him as an illustration, we as Christians should be that way towards Jesus Christ. We should love him so much that we're not pursuing him because of what we can get from him. I know some of y'all, probably like me, got saved because you'd rather go to heaven to hell, right? Who wants to go to heaven? Who wants to go to hell? Anybody? Anybody? Going once, going twice? I mean, one of the reasons you got saved was because of what you could get from Jesus. Is that a true statement? But eventually in there, one of the reasons you remain a Christian isn't because of what you can get from, but because you care so much. You'd be a Christian just because you've gotten to know who Christ is. And He's that valuable. Am I making sense? So what's happening here with Jesus is all these people, this crowd is following Him, not because they want Him, but because of what they can get from Him. And so Matthew takes a pause in these miracles, and he has these guys show up and interact with Jesus, and Jesus interact with them. And there's two guys we'll look at. One of them does the kind of leap before you think. Any of y'all broken an arm because you didn't think through what you were doing? And after the fact, you're like, doggone it. Do you know what I'm talking about? You do something and there's consequences that you didn't count them before you did something. Any of y'all do that? I have two sons. They're not present, so I can tell you this. One of them would always think through what they were getting ready to do, and he taught the other one into doing it to see what would happen. Okay? And the other one would always jump right in without ever thinking. That's why he's had broken bones. And I mean, one of them's like, whoa, you go do that and let's see what happens. And that's what this first guy is. He's the one that acts before thinking. The second one is the one that thinks it through before committing. And so what you see in verse 18 is a call to discipleship. These verses are all about discipleship. And I know that's a churchy word. We don't use that word anymore. And what really discipleship is a surrendering to and a complete following of. You completely surrender your life to Jesus Christ and you decide, I'm going to be just like Him. And you start following Him. That's discipleship. Complete commitment. So verse 18 opens up with, when Jesus saw the crowd around Him, He gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. He is absolutely exhausted. And He's like, let's get out of Dodge, let's get in the boat and go to the other side and find another crowd and give me some time to rest. And so He and His disciples get ready to head out and take off. Now, if you're a member of that crowd, you've gotten to know Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. He taught some amazing wisdom about how to be more godly. And you've gotten to see the miracles of all those healings. Now, who would want to keep following Him? They see what He does next. I mean, He's getting in a boat and He's getting ready to go. What are you going to do? You're going to like, see you, Jesus, come back soon. Or are you going to go, I've got some free time. I think I can catch up and go with Him. Which would you do? And so, verse 19, a teacher of the law came up to Jesus and said, Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go. That's a noble statement, is it not? Did you say that to your boss at work? I'll follow you wherever you go. Would you say that? Some of y'all are thinking, I don't know about my boss. Do you say that to your spouse? When you get married, that's one of the things in the marriage vow. I'll follow you wherever you go. You say that to each other because you're making a complete commitment to one another. So this is quite a noble statement. And do you think Jesus wants him to follow Him? What do you think Jesus is saying? He wants the guy. He wants the guy to sell out and to follow Him. Now this is teacher of the law. Did the Pharisees like Jesus at this time? They're growing to dislike Him, right? How about the Sadducees? Who did those two guys send to test Jesus half the time? Teachers of the law. So the teachers of the law like Jesus? Some like Him, some don't. This guy apparently is an admirer of Jesus. Then he says, I'm going to follow you wherever you go. It's a statement without counting the cost. Because that means you have given up all the choices of your life. Wherever that person goes, you're going regardless of where it is. So if you decide to be a Christian and God says, I'm sending you to the Arctic, what are you going to say? I can tell you what I'd say. God, send me to Central America. It's warm. I can't take the cold. Would y'all do that? Or would you rather go to the Arctic Circle? Yeah, Arctic Circle. I got one taker. All right. I'll be praying that you'll go there and take your dad with you. You got the beard to keep it warm, man. But to say that statement, it is a statement of utter surrender. He hasn't stopped to consider the commitment that statement makes. Because he's thinking, I will follow. What does that statement say? In my own strength, I'll do what you do. What does Jesus call us to do? To live in His strength and not our own. To sell out all that we are and follow Him with a whole heart. And I think this guy is thinking, I can do it my way and follow Him and at least be good enough. Any of y'all watch the AT&T commercials? You know, the doctor that comes in, guess who got reinstated? And the guy sitting in the bed, and the nurse says, he asks, is he good? And she said, he's good enough. And he looks at the patient and said, you nervous? And the patient said, yeah. And he said, I am too, but we'll get through it. He's good enough. And most of us think we're good enough. And that's what this guy's saying. I can make a confirmation with my mouth, and I don't have to do anything else. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this, only he who obeys truly believes, and only he who believes truly obeys. Let me say that again. Only he who obeys truly believes. Only he who believes truly obeys. And he's reaffirming what James says, faith without works is dead. Faith without works is dead. And he's reaffirming that. He's saying that if you state it with your mouth, and that's all you ever do, you really don't believe it because you don't live it. You can't say, I love you, Jesus, but you act like the world. You can't act like the world and say, I'm a Christian, and actually mean it. There's got to be a collision of both. And that's what Jesus is calling this guy to. Because in verse 20, he gives the weirdest reply. Jesus looks at the guy and says, foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to rest. Have y'all ever prayed and got an answer from God? And it's like, why did He answer that way? That doesn't make any sense. I prayed for this and God said this over here. Any of y'all had that before? You'll see this a reoccurring theme in the Bible. People come up and ask Jesus a question and He gives a totally unexpected reply. So what the heck does He mean here? Why is He saying the Son of Man has no place to lie, foxes have holes and birds have nests? Isn't that a weird reply? When the guy says, I'm going to follow you, Jesus, that's a huge compliment. So, Jesus, you're worth following. I'm going to follow you. Foxes have holes, birds have nests. Son of Man has no place to lay his head. What he's saying is in Palestine, foxes were very common. You don't see them often here, but foxes were very common. They'd come out of their dens at night, and they'd hunt the rabbits, they'd hunt the mice. They actually were known for rampaging, just demolishing orchards. Foxes eat anything. And they were plentiful. Birds actually then would nest in houses. You know, the houses, they could put their nests up in the houses, in the towns, and so birds were fairly common. Later on in history, Genghis Khan is actually said to have he sent spies into a town ahead of him, and they collected the birds of the town and then brought them to Genghis Khan. Khan then sent an emissary and told the town to surrender before I get there. They refused to do so. So he took the birds and he tied an ember to their legs, a burning ember, and released the birds. Do you know where they went? They went home. Where was home? In the town. What happened when those embers got to the town and the nests? It lit the whole town on fire. Birds have homes, and they return to them daily. And foxes have dens, and they return to them daily. The Son of Man has no place to rest his head. And what he's telling this guy is give up the security of this world, because this world is temporary, and embrace the eternal in him. It's not an off-the-wall statement. They would have understood it just like that. The foxes have a place, the birds have a place, and they're secure in that, even though it's temporary. But the Son of Man has no place to lay his head on this world, because this is not his home. Where's his home? Eternity. And he's calling this man to be committed to something other than what he's comfortable with. What are you comfortable with? What is keeping you from committing to God? And some of y'all say, I'm committed to God. And you probably are. But I guarantee you got doorstops in places that are keeping him out. I did Betty Whitmire's funeral yesterday. And I told a couple of y'all, her funeral was an easy funeral to do in this respect. I had her Bible, and her Bible was chock full of stuff. She had used it so much it broke in half. And it was so easy to flip through there and see the fruits of her labors, because she'd invested time in the Lord. And if you knew Betty, you could see her and her reflecting Christ in a lot of ways. Was she perfect? Absolutely not. There's only one that is. But it's so easy to talk about somebody that you know, to the best of our abilities, that they were followers of Christ. What's scary is in those times when you're not sure, and you're doing a service and you don't want to tell people who are living on the edge that their security is safe because this person went to heaven, and you're like, I don't know if they did or not. And that's giving false security. So this person could have been an absolute heathen, and if I say, oh, they're in heaven to give comfort, I've given false security to these guys so they can behave just like them. It's a wrong reflection. It's a wrong lifestyle. But with Betty, it was really easy. And that's what Jesus is calling here. He's calling us into the firm security of the rock of heaven, Jesus the Christ, not the security of the comforts of this world, the temporary. So he's calling us to step into insecurity. What does that look like? What's insecurity to you? The unknown. Does Jesus ever show you the next step to take? Absolutely. Does he show you the next 5 steps down the road? No, not at all. How many of y'all have a plan for the next 5 years? I'm not letting you plan in my future. Y'all aren't doing it. Y'all plan ahead? Who has your vacation already planned this summer? Anybody? Who has a marriage planned this summer? There we go. Y'all plan something. So you are planning. And so if you surrender those plans, if you said, okay, Larry, I want you to plan out our wedding completely, would you be happy? Would you trust me, Lisa? No, you wouldn't. You'd go, there's no way I'm letting some man plan my wedding. There's no way. If the rest of y'all said, okay, Larry, I want you to plan out our vacation step by step. And I said, okay, I got you. I'm not going to tell you until you get in the plane and take off. How many of y'all would do that? Anybody? Because you know where you'd end up? I'm going to send you to Fountain Inn to a bed and breakfast. How many like that? You don't know. And it's like, it's a huge statement of faith to do something like that. And that's what Jesus is calling us to. He's calling us to don't rely on what you've got here on earth, but trust teetotally in what He's given us. Foxes have dens, birds have nests. The Lord of heaven has no place to lay His head. And so the problem we run into is we have commitment issues. Any of y'all thrown parties? And you get 20 people commit to it, and then 5 minutes before the party, you're wondering if anybody's going to show up? Anybody do that before? The reason is because we have commitment issues. What if 15 minutes before that party, something else better came up? I got tickets to Hollywood, or to Dollywood. I'm going to that instead of the party I committed to. Anybody would do that? You're like, oh, don't lie. We have commitment issues. I was looking for illustrations for this, and I came across a story about a preacher. At the end of the service, you know how I stand in the back and I shake y'all's hands and say bye and talk to you. He was standing in the back, and it was Easter Sunday. And this guy came by and he shook his hand and he wouldn't let go. The preacher grabbed his hand with both hands and looked at him and said, "You need to join the Lord's army." And the guy said, "I am in the Lord's army." The preacher's still holding on with both hands and said, "Well, why don't I see you more often?" And the guy said, "I'm in the Secret Service." It's a commitment issue. He only comes Sundays on Christmas and Easter, and that's it. But he still says, "I'm a Christian." Is he committed? Who's he committed to? What's he committed to? What's he selling out for? And that's what Jesus is calling here. He's calling us to be like him. He's the archetype, the epitome of humanity. He didn't, for all we know, he had a robe, a sandals, and he walked everywhere he went. And that's about all he had. He relied on the Lord to deliver him. I mean, yeah, you can say, well, he's God. He is God. But he had total faith in what comes next and where God had sent him and doing the Lord's mission. And he taught the disciples to do the same thing. And we should resemble him and rely on him and trust in him. Yet I fear that we, the people, resemble more of the Pharisees than we do the disciples. Because we're scared to commit. We're scared to sell out. He's looking at this guy and he's saying, I don't have disciples that are not willing to lay down everything to follow me. And he's the guy that was born in a stable. There was no doctor present, no midwife present. It was born in a stable in a filthy, nasty place. And he was raised as a carpenter, not an aristocrat, not a king. He is the king. But if you consider him the King of Kings, what did his kingdom resemble that man's kingdom resembles? It's very different. There was a missionary named Archibald Glover. He served in China. And while he was serving in China, they were traveling, and a band of bandits started chasing them. And as the sun was setting, Archibald and his family had to find a place to hide. And so they found the place that nobody would want to go into. It was a burned-out hulk of a building. It was rat-infested. It was absolute filth. And so Archibald took his family, including his 5-year-old son Henley, into the building to hide from the bandits. And he's talking with his wife, and Henley said, "Daddy, I think Jesus must have slept in a place like this when he had nowhere to go." And Archibald said, "Yes, my boy, I think you're very likely." And this is a 5-year-old boy. Listen to what he said back to his dad. He said, "Then we ought to be glad to be just like Christ and suffer for him." I think our commitment issues to Jesus is a fear of the unknown and a fear of suffering. When you became a Christian, you probably thought the road was going to be paved with roses, that you'd go to bed at night and you wake up smelling fresh, and that life would be easy. When in fact, Jesus never, ever promised that. In fact, he said, if you follow me, it'll be harder. Pick up your cross and carry it. It's not an easy task. He couldn't even do it. At the end, remember, he was so beaten, he had to get somebody else to carry his cross, and he's calling us to do that. It's not that he couldn't. He was already carrying the sins of the world for all of us. And he calls us to step up in faith in him. The next guy comes up to him and says, "Lord, I'll follow you, but let me go back and bury my father." This guy's thought through the first guy's proclamation and thought, you know what? Jesus, you are worth it. You are worth it, Jesus. But you know what? I've got about 5 more things I got to do with my life before I give it over to you. I need control so I can get what I want done first. And then once I get that done, I'll follow you. How many of y'all had enough money to have children when you had children? Anybody? How many of you heard somebody tell you, we're waiting to get a little more money so that we can have children? Anybody say that? Did you ever have enough? Did they always spend more than you had? Anybody? Absolutely. But we always find a way to talk to Jesus and say, you know what, Jesus, I hear you. I hear you, but. And when you use that but, what you're saying is, I'm smarter than you. And that's what this dude's saying. This guy's looking at Christ and saying, Lord, let me first go do this, and then I'll come follow you. And Jesus, he hears him saying, you're worth it, but not right this moment. And so he answers him and says, let the dead bury the dead. You follow me. And what he's saying is, if you go back with that but, and you live outside of Christ, you'll die just like those people you're waiting to bury. Because you're living in the temporary rather than the eternal. And Christ is calling this guy. He's not saying, well, then just go away and don't follow me. He's saying, come follow me, because you'll want eternity more than the temporary. You know, somewhere in your recent history or your long speckled past, you made a decision to follow Christ, I hope. And when you made that decision to follow Christ, there was probably some instances where you thought, you know, Lord, I'll do that, but let me do this first. Or you may have jumped in both feet first, and you were the most awesome Christian ever, and then you took a break. You might be in the middle of that break. You might be standing back thinking, Lord, I'll give you everything in my life but this. Let me tell you something that you don't see Jesus doing here. Do you see these two guys when he says, follow me, and they turn and walk away? What do you see Jesus do? The very next thing, he's in the boat and he's sailing away while they walk the opposite way. He doesn't come chase them. He doesn't lay hands on them. He doesn't drag them back. Eventually, you've got to fall on your knees and call him and say, Lord, I'm sorry. I've lacked the commitment to you. And in that lack of commitment, what I've told you is you're not worth it. Even though while he was on the cross and he looked down at you and he said, you're worth me being here. You said, I don't know that I trust you yet. If you're in that spot, what you're doing is you're realizing the cost of following Christ is high. But I can tell you this with absolute certainty. That cost is worth paying. Because the temporary won't be any better without him. But the eternal will be far better with him. Don't miss your opportunity to have faith and relationship with Christ because you're scared of commitment. Because you're fearful of the what next. Because I tell you, the Lord only has your best interests at heart. He'll call you to do hard things. He'll call you to do things you never dreamt you could. And you couldn't without him. It's time for us to be committed. Because I tell you one thing, this country, this world will not get better. It'll only get worse. And the only way people will come to know you in a worsening world, get to know Christ in a worsening world, is through you and your reflection of him. That's what we're called to be, his disciples. Those who sell out all that we are because we trust him with all that we are. Lord, Heavenly Father, Lord, I know I've been the guy that said, I'll follow you wherever you go. And the next day I woke up and I followed my roommates wherever they went. I know I've been that guy that said, okay, God, I hear what you're saying, but this isn't a good time for me. Let me go do a couple other things first, and then I'll come back to you. I think we've all done that with you, Lord, and we ask your forgiveness. We forget who we are before you, Lord. And sometimes we just think that we are the important thing. Lord, I just pray that you will keep us humble, that you will keep our focus on the light that you are. Because this world is dark, and darkness simply is that which is without light. And Lord, you are the only thing that brings light. You are the heat that brings life. You are in your presence. You are glorious, and you pour your glory upon us. Lord, help us. Lord, lead us to lay our lives at your feet and to trust you wholly. Wherever you may call, whatever you may say, let us know that what you say is truth, not what we think. We don't define reality. You created it. Help us not to be the guy that jumped up and then withered away, or the guy that jumped up and said, wait, let me do this first. Lord, make us your people so that we may impact people living life around us, because they need you more than we do. We found you. We trust you, and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen.